So this little bit of video is about my mum, Lillian Violet Houghton. She always hated being called Violet. Not quite sure why. I suppose she thought it was a bit of a funny name. But the idea is to record a bit of Houghton history and also just get a bit more sort of video practice in front of the camera. So Lillian was one of 10 children. She had 5 sisters, I think it was. So her older sisters were Rose and Doris. Younger ones were Betty and June. And then her brothers, in age order again, were Bill, Tom, Dennis, Stan, and Pete. They were all living in the same house in Lannoy Road with their mum and dad, Bill and Liz Greenwood. Bill was a guy who worked in a glass factory making glass rollers. His job was to smooth them out, and apparently he came back with little splinters of glass in his fingers, making them all red or something like that. He was walked with a limp as well. I seem to remember from some accident with a kid's toy hoop, heavy hoop that rolled into his leg and damaged it, and one thing and another. Anyway, my mum's younger years were so long ago that going to school wasn't really that much of a thing, and so I think she came out of school very, very early. Although she was a very bright lady. I mean, she was very clever and had a lot of common sense. And she did a little bit of work, I think, to begin with, as a sort of maid and cleaner in a house. But she was also used by her mum to be in charge of the other children. She talks of having being given 6 minutes to feed all of them, which I suppose you could in those days. But her other great love was doing sport, and she used to tell stories of how she would enter sports competitions over the fields over in New Elton Way, and they would be really for local sports clubs and schools, which she wasn't part of. But she'd take part in the race anyway, and if she won them, which I gather she did quite often, she would then not turn up for the prizes because she wasn't really entitled to win the race in the first place. Anyway, that sort of sporting attribute, plus the fact that a lot of people in those days did that sort of thing, meant that she joined the local cycle club. And here you can see her with some of her pals, and indeed her sister Doris. Here you've got quite a long line of people, and at the end of this line is my dad Stan, who obviously she eventually married. Though interestingly, in this picture, she's with a guy called Johnny Proctor, who I think was probably her first boyfriend, but we never really heard very much about him. So it wasn't long before the end of the 30s meant that not much thought was to cycling, and much more thought was to war. And so my mum was actually the only one of all 10 of her family who ended up joining up the services for the Second World War. And she ended up going into an outfit called the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. And she joined as a driver. She went up to Morecambe to learn how to drive. Lots of great stories of her crashing into gates and one thing and another. And she ended up driving these sort of cars around all over the country with various senior officers inside, visiting radar stations and all that stuff. And I think in many ways she quite enjoyed it. There wouldn't have been many people in those days as young girls driving, and I think she generally enjoyed it. The bit she didn't enjoy was the duty that put her in charge of driving the large American ambulance. One of the problems with this thing was that it didn't have any adjustable seats, and so being a short person, my mum was about 5'2", I'm 6'2", but she was 5'2", and so her little legs could reach the pedals. She used to end up taking her greatcoat with her everywhere, so that it would push her forward enough to reach the pedals. Anyway, she's still in touch with Stan at this stage, who had gone off to war as well, joining the Royal Engineers, and eventually, before the war ended, they got married. And here you can see the picture of them getting married in uniform, and then subsequently going on holiday on their honeymoon down to Torquay. Perhaps unsurprisingly, shortly after that, baby Tony was born around about 1949. Was it 45? Must have been 45, 1945. So life continued. My dad came out of the army and became a surveyor with lots of night classes, which my mum helped him write up his reports and notes on. He went off to work for the Greater London Council. I'll perhaps do another little talk about him in due course. They moved in to a place not too far away from sort of Sidcup Way, before then coming to the house which I knew in Lingfield Crescent in southeast London. So I was born when my mum was 42. I suspect that was probably a bit of a surprise, but my mum always claimed that it gave her sort of a new lease of life. She always kept in touch with her sisters and brothers that were in the area, mainly sisters Betty and Brenda and Doris, and we used to go walking with Timmy the dog over the Abbeywood Way where Betty used to live. And I think probably partly from that experience my mum decided that she quite fancied the idea of getting a dog, and sure enough Jason dog came along. And there we have it, really. So that's most of my mum's history. She always had lots of friends. My dad died, leaving her alone, really for the last probably sort of 15 years of her life, and she definitely missed him. But she had lots of friends around her. She went and did her keep fit thing. She was always chatting to people at the bus stop. And she eventually passed away at the not unreasonable age of just over 81. So that's my mum, Lillian Violet Houghton. Hope you enjoyed it.